You're listening to Bigfoot Society, and I'm Jeremiah Byron. In this show, we go beyond the campfire stories to bring you firsthand encounters from people who say they've seen something impossible, from backwoods trails and remote mountain haulers to quiet farms and crowded highways. The stories come from everywhere, and each one leaves us with more questions than answers. These are the voices of the people who've lived it, so settle in, because today you'll hear another account that just might change the way you see the woods forever. So stay with us. All right, Bigfoot Society, you've got the privilege of talking to Jim today. Jim is a hunter who reached out to me from the Pacific Northwest over email. He has been out there quite a bit. That's an understatement. And he's had some really interesting things happen. Areas we'll be talking about today have definitely come up on the show. If you're aware of the Oregon Bigfoot Highway, then you'll probably be familiar with a lot of the areas we'll be talking about today. But welcome to the show, Jim. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thank you. How are you doing?
Doing good. We've already had a little chat before you went out and went hunting. I think it was maybe a week or so ago, and that was an enjoyable time. And I've been looking forward to chatting with you again, because you are definitely an individual who, I mean, the amount of time you spend in the woods is incredible. Do you mind sharing a little bit about how much time you're actually out there every year?
I'm out there a bunch. You know, on my busier years, I'm probably in the woods maybe 300 days a year. You know, people have a lot of things they do for entertainment. I scout around and take drives in the mountains, and try to get out and venture and keep on top of what the animals are doing and so on and so forth. So I hunt virtually almost year round. I spring bear hunt, do quite a bit of scouting leading into that, and then from spring bear we go right into the summertime, which then it's time to start following the elk and keeping an eye on where the bucks are, and then we turn around and August 1st, we open up fall bear season. And then September 1st, or right about there, we open our archery elk season. And then October 1st, we open our black-tailed deer season. And then that goes all the way into the first week of November. And then the second week of November, we start our rifle elk season. And then if we haven't gotten fall bears yet, then we, continue to hunt bears all the way till the 31st of December, depending on weather. But typically the only time that I'm not there regularly in the mountains is probably, Christmas up through February 1st or so. And then we go snow wheeling. So we go four-wheeling in the snow because, that's what you can do at that time of year. So, and then my kids, I have four boys, and they, two of my boys are nephews that I raised, and they all hunt different seasons. So it gives me the opportunity to go with them on all the seasons I don't hunt. So we're hunting archery elk right now, and I do a lot of calling and that kind of stuff for them, and tons of scouting. And when we can't find animals, we go separate ways until one of us gets into them, and then we get together that evening and come up with a plan to go to the area where the animals are. And so that's why I get to hunt all these different seasons, is pretty much between my my immediate family, we have tags for every season there is. So I guess that's kind of the story on how I spend so much time up there. And I'm also 30 minutes away from the mountain. So, I can be in 30 minutes, I can be up the corridor in Malala. 30 minutes, I can be well up the Clackamas River outside of Estacada, and then everything in between. Started up there when I was a little kid. My dad took me camping up there, and he started dragging me around hunting with him when I was about 8 years old. We can't hunt here until 12 years old. Well, we can now. There's a few new things going on where you can mentor kids and let them hunt with your tag and that kind of stuff. But that was, when I was growing up, that wasn't the case. But my dad wanted me used to it, and he loved the mountains. So he gave me my first hunting rifle, my 30-06. And when I was 8 years old, he had me start carrying it around in the woods while I followed him deer hunting and elk hunting and that kind of thing. So that's kind of the story of how I end up spending a ton of time there.
Wow, Jim, you're one of those guys. I could imagine. You know every creature that's in the woods of this Clackamas County area. You know every sound. I mean, you've got it just locked down in the knowledge category of this area, which is extremely active Bigfoot area. Do you remember, was there a time when you realized, hey, there's something else going on out here? Maybe you had an experience or an encounter that really kicked things off?
I'd had a ton of experiences from age 13 all the way to date, but I wasn't, I really didn't have a lot. I don't know. I was on the fence. I didn't not believe that, there was a creature out there that people call Sasquatch. I did not believe it, but I was the type that would, if you believed in it, I'd argue, against you. And if you didn't believe in it, I'd argue against you. So I just, was just kind of on the fence and didn't really think much of it. Later on in the late 90s, when I actually saw one, that changed everything. It was a very interesting feeling. I spent a lot of time, for example, I'd find elk a day or two before the elk season would open, and I just follow them. And wherever I spent the night in the woods, I could be, miles from the truck. I just spend the night there and wake up and be with the herd in the morning. And not many people are it's spooky to, especially the first handful of times you do it. It's spooky just to go to sleep out in the middle of nowhere in the timber when you have none of your typical securities. I mean, I was armed, so that's that's a security, but you can be armed and you don't and not feel safe when things can come at you from any direction and you don't have any way to see it. Once you see something like that, those nights of hiking miles and miles and laying down in the woods become few and far between. It definitely changes. I when I was young, I had fear of noises I didn't recognize and those kind of things, and probably a fear of getting lost. And that's I kind of point that to why I know that country so well, pretty much from Mount Hood to Detroit, and I know a lot of other country in Oregon, but that's my stomping grounds. That's when we were kids growing up. As soon as we had driver's licenses, me and my buddies would head up there every second we could after school, after on the weekends, you name it. That was our stomping grounds, and we were constantly exploring. And I went out of my way to learn the country is good or better than probably anyone out there because I had a kind of a fear of being lost. And that was about the peak of it. And when I had actually seen one of these things in person, it changed everything. I sat and watched this thing, and I was so afraid. With a rifle in my hand, I even had a friend with a rifle in his hand right next to me, and we were hidden in the woods watching this little meadow that was kind of at the top of a deep dark timbered canyon, and small little meadow. And when we saw that thing, neither one of us moved. In fact, we we were so afraid to move. We kind of looked at each other. We never said a word. And we ended up not we walked out of there probably an hour and a half after dark. It took us that long to get the nerve to move because we were afraid it'd see us. And in this case, this thing didn't see us. It had no idea we were there. So it was, the fear of it realizing we were there that was just climbing inside of us. It was pretty crazy.
Oh, wow. So this entire time you're having this sighting, it doesn't know you're there. It's kind of like you're almost observing something at the zoo, but I mean, you're out there in the woods. Are we able to share where this took place? I think I have it in the email here, but I'm just
Yeah,
checking.
yeah. That took place. The creek bottom that the meadow sits up above is Last Creek, which comes off. It's south of Peavine Mountain. And actually, the road that goes to the top of Peavine Mountain, it was the road that comes from the top of Peavine Mountain. If you follow it to the south, it comes out and tees into a road called 4210. And maps can be confused. Some maps will say that that's 42, but it's actually 4210. 40. Unfortunately, these maps for the Bigfoot Highway area, a lot of them are not accurate. Road placements are accurate, but road numbers, names, and things can be wrong, even from the Forest Service. So, yeah, if you tee into the 4210 road and you were to go west within 200 yards, is where I actually had my truck parked and headed, walked, south directly into what would be, it's about 40-year-old timber now, but at the time, it was just basically very large regrow or a reprod, and there's a couple little hidden meadows in there. It's very thick, but there's some hidden little meadows and some old skidder roads from when they originally logged it, and we usually sneak down the skidder roads, and then it goes into heavy timber right as you kind of break over the edge and you start heading down to the creek. It's pretty steep, pretty deep and pretty steep, but it's not real bad if you're used to the area. If you're not used to the area, it would be very steep and dark and scary. But if you're used to the area, it's about 5 on the difficulty level of the timber and how dark and steep it is. And where we were sitting, it was kind of funny because we were driving in and the highway was still closed down in 1996. The big flood washed out a bunch of the highway, and the only way to get into like Highway 63 going up the Clackamas River and all that was to go up over Mount Hood and come in on Highway 42, which is Skyline Road, and then you'd have to basically come all the way back in, probably, I don't know, 15 miles or 20 miles, 20 miles at least. Yeah. And then you'd have to drop down to the Highway 46 and work your way through the road, which was in very bad shape also. And then down to 63 and go up the Clackamas. And that we intended to elk hunt up there. This was the night before Cascade elk season, which is the third Saturday of October, or was until the last couple of years. So we were that Friday night, it's about 1 a.m, and we were cruising down 4210, and a giant bull elk ran across the road, and a young raghorn bull was following right behind him, and they were scared out of their wits, and they don't usually move, like that at 1 a.m. unless something's on them. Well, they ended up crossing the road, so we changed our mind and decided we were going to stay there the rest of the night, and we'd sneak into where the elk ran, and at first light. And oddly enough, we wait till first light, and the elk were there, but we never saw them. And we had come back around lunchtime, and we're sitting in the truck BSing, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, this great big bull elk comes running out of the woods and is running down the road away from us, and we're all sitting there. None of us even have our rifles in our hands. They're sitting in the back and on the back of the trucks and this and that, and we're looking at each other going, wow. And that bull takes off running in there, and then we decide, okay, well, we'll figure out a place to camp somewhere nearby, and we're going to go ahead and again in the evening. And we had been visiting for probably another hour, and all of a sudden we hear this rustling in the woods, and a mountain lion comes scrambling out of the same place that big bull elk came running out of, which was, that last creek area in there. It came running out across the road with its tail between its legs, and I've never seen a mountain lion under any circumstances with its tail between its legs. No matter what they're going through, usually you can tell their demeanor by the way their ears are, whether they're going to attack or whether they're, curious or whether they don't care about you. It's all about how their ears are setting usually. And unlike a dog or something like that, where you'd watch the tail, and this thing scrambled across the road just like the bull elk did. And we thought that was one of the strangest things we've ever seen. And we ended up hanging out and deciding to go in a couple hours before dark. And we hiked down this little skidder road. It's overgrown, but it's a nice little trail. And me and one of my buddies, my boy and my buddy's wife, ended up going the other side of the road where it appeared that the herd was. And we got down in there and found that little meadow. And well, we knew the meadow was there. We just were going to we just needed to relocate it. And we found the meadow, and instead of walking into the meadow or anything, we kind of fish hooked around off of that, little trail and or skidder road, and got ourselves back in the brush where there was nothing backgrounding us, to where we weren't silhouettes of any way. We were hidden really, really well in a nice quiet place where we had a good shooting lane into that meadow. And maybe 30 minutes went by, and we could hear a couple little sticks break, and a cow elk comes walking out of the timber into the meadow and is walking from right to left to me, a lot, pretty much within a couple yards of the timber line, and walking through that meadow. And the elk starts to turn to go into the woods, and all of a sudden here comes another one right out of the exact same place the cow walked out of the timber. And it ends up that this is not an elk. It's on two legs, and it followed right behind that cow elk, just very slowly walking. And that's when we looked at each other and we looked back, and it was insane. We I think what was going through our heads after talking about it a lot since then is that neither one of us could figure out what it was or why, or was it, and it was very much like, a lot of people say apes, they say humans, they say it had more human characteristics than anything. I mean, the way it walked, and it was deliberately following that cow elk. I don't know if it was practicing its hunt or if it was getting ready to hunt, or, I mean, who knows what was going on there. It appeared that he was hunting that elk, and I say he, I don't know if it was he or she. It didn't have breasts, but it's interesting because we were so scatterbrained looking at this thing that people talk about their eyes and their colors and this and that. The face on this thing was a blur. It literally was so well put together in natural camouflage that there were no highlights on the face at all. Absolutely none. You couldn't see details of the eyes. It definitely had a very flat face. It did not have, any kind of I call it a dog's nose, a beak. It didn't have any kind of beak whatsoever. It was just similar to what a human would be. And the other thing that was really different compared to, the thousands of stories I've heard is that at the tallest, this was maybe 7.5 feet tall. I would say probably closer to 7 feet. I'm 6'3", and it wasn't a lot taller than me. It was big. It was very scary. So it had a look to it that it could do whatever it wanted. I would say in this case, some people say, gosh, my gun wouldn't have been enough to kill it. I would disagree with that. I could have killed it, but I didn't know what it was. I even at, I was 30 yards away from it, and I could not verify what it was. My mind was going 1,000 miles an hour trying to figure out what the heck this thing is. And, the thought kept crossing that it was like a human in a suit. There was no possible way that was the case, but your brain is still, and maybe I wasn't prepared for it because I've never gone out looking for it. It could be that maybe my mind just wasn't prepared, but my mind couldn't settle. It just, and I couldn't focus on any part of it. It was really, really weird. I find myself looking up and down it. Like you see somebody stunning and you naturally, without putting an effort, you naturally kind of look up and down them. And it was like that. Yeah, I found myself going up and down, trying to figure this out. And it was interesting. It was very scary. I did feel like, if you shot it, you better kill it because it'd probably rip you apart. And knowing how fast bears move in the woods, from the appearance, it looks like this thing would be pretty fast. And the bear can close the gap of 30 yards in just, I mean, it seems like a second. They're so fast. And yeah, that was kind of it. We stayed there until dark, and then we went ahead and stayed up there the next morning, and we'd seen exactly where it walked. So my friend drove back to town, the friend who was with me. And by the way, that friend was one of the total, when anybody ever said anything about Bigfoot or Sasquatch, he was absolutely no possible way in heck that such a thing exists. Absolutely no way until that moment. And that moment changed his life and his beliefs, I'll tell you. It was probably more devastating for him, because I was kind of open-minded that there was a possibility of something like this. But, he was completely closed to the whole idea. And so he went back to town and got plaster and came back and casted an absolutely perfect print that, going through that meadow. And we saw him standing. We saw him make the print. We saw him standing in it. So there's no question of whether that print was real or not. And the funny thing is like a few years back, this is clear back in the late 90s, this happened. And a few years back, he took that casting into the North American Bigfoot Museum there, the Cliff character. And they glanced at the track and said it wasn't real. And I'm like,
Okay.
yeah, well, when you see it standing in it, it's real. Yeah, so that was kind of something else that it kind of makes I don't follow really, I'll watch YouTube stuff and that kind of stuff, but like I say, I'm not going to be a researcher. There's way too much controversy over that. And I like to hunt. I don't like to go out there and chase critters that some people believe in and others don't. It's just, to me, it's kind of a waste of my time. It just happens to be the areas that I go in, I seem to have a lot of activity. But again, when you hunt that many years up there, you go to the places that you rarely see anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's very much the case. I heard your interview with the guy that a lot of people think's crazy. That I think his last name starts with a Z. Oh my goodness. Anyway, he's talked about Skookum Lake and that kind of stuff, and I've actually seen that guy up at Skookum Lake. Had no idea who he was until
Henry Franzoni.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's no longer with us, but that's incredible. That's where he had. Okay, so oh man, there's this interview is going to be nuts. There's a few questions I want to ask before we leave the Peavine Mountain area, but I'm going to make a note about Henry Franzoni. Yeah, he's what a guy. I'm going to make a note about that. Okay, so you have the sighting and it doesn't see you. So you're saying that it pretty much it keeps following the elk cow and then it leaves the area, correct?
Yep, it followed that cow right into the timber, exactly where that it basically followed that elk's footprints, and it literally right behind it. I would say that inside of 20 feet behind it, following along. It was very, very close to that elk, and the elk didn't respond to it at all. So it was really, really interesting because, elk are pretty spooky. Typically, once an elk smells you, it's over. They can look at you, they can hear you, they won't put a lot of stock into it, but if they smell you, it's over. And I don't know any way that you could be 20 feet away following, especially, I mean, this thing's not walking in a straight line into the wind. It's literally kind of come out of the woods, a little bit of a straight line and made a bend and now going another direction. There's no way you could make that loop without getting wind of it. But the cow elk just walked on, and that thing followed it. And, there was never any breakout where the elk took off. You can definitely hear once an elk gets spooked and it runs, it makes a lot of noise. So yeah, it was crazy. And that thing never took its eyes off that cow. And maybe that's why, I couldn't tell you, really good details of the facial. I remember thinking how well the face blent in, and it was shocking to me. That I remember the hands definitely being, they were clearly bald on the bottom of the hands. There was hair on the back of the hands, and then it seemed that the hair kind of started about halfway up the side of the hand or the finger. But the hands definitely looked like an old working man's hands. Just, probably, fingers twice as bulky as what you would consider for something that size. The arm length was right in the middle of what people, some people say normal length, some people say down around the knees. His fingertips definitely did not touch his knees. I would say, his fingertips were 3/4 of the way down his thighs. And yeah, he never once looked at us. So that may have been why we couldn't get or why I didn't see any details to his face, is that he was focused on that cow the entire time.
Absolutely. Who has the track cast?
My buddy, he's
That's
over
awesome.
in Montana.
Okay, very cool. Very cool. That's cool. He still has it, and sounds like it did really affect him. So tell me about the Skookum Lake area. There's a lot of history to that area, and it sounds like you had a time where you actually ran into Henry Franzoni at that area. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, I mean, I had no idea who he was, and quite honestly, I thought that he was a little bit crazy. But I have quite a bit. I have a much more open mind now, to what was going through his head. But I'm not saying I'm 100% sold on his whole ideas and all that. But who's to say, you know? But yeah, I spent a lot of time up at Skookum and up at a lake called Surprise Lake, which is just west across the canyon from Skookum Lake, which is Surprise Lake was probably had less guests than Skookum Lake, and either one were just so far off the beaten path. You could hike into Skookum Lake. You still can hike into Skookum Lake relatively easily. You can even ride a motorcycle in there. That's how good the trail is coming from the Malala side. But Surprise Lake was, up higher in elevation, west and up at the top. And I heard some crazy stuff up there and spent tons of time. But like I say, it's so far out there. Once you leave, you know, Highway 46 or Highway 224, whatever you want to call it, it's actually Highway 46 right there. But once you leave where Fish Creek comes off of Highway 46, it's 14 miles up to Skookum Lake. So you can't, and it's passable pretty much only by foot now. They never fixed it after the '96 floods and all the there's probably 50 creeks in that 14 miles that cross the road, and every one of those culverts is ripped out, with some naturally, some they went ahead and tore out. But so there's really no way you're going up there now. But even back then, we'd go up there, half a dozen or more times a year. And I don't recall ever seeing more than, I saw one other guy on a motorcycle one time, and and saw a couple of young people camping in a Subaru or something one time, and I saw him maybe twice, but I actually talked to him once, and it was just so weird to run into somebody up there. And when I was hearing him talk about his van and this and that, and then I ended up digging a little further to get a look at him and on the TV, and I'm like, yeah, that's the guy.
Wow. So he was just hanging out up there. Was he just sitting around trying to see if he could get any interactions or?
Well, he had said that he was walking around and mostly interested in hearing what goes on at night and that kind of stuff. But when I'd seen him, he was just hanging out. He wasn't 15 yards from his van and just hanging out. So which is there's very few people that do that. You gotta really like the mountains to just get that far away from everything and just sit around. So, as far as I was concerned, he was just a guy that needed his peace and quiet and had no idea he was that serious about the whole Bigfoot thing. He mentioned the Bigfoot thing,
Oh, okay.
but it, it, it was kind of going in one ear and out the other because, it seemed like he was kind of pushing more of the alien thing and I was really, really open to, it there could be certainly a creature that was somehow left behind or managed to keep itself in hiding. You got tribes in South America that, have just recently been noticed, and other ones they didn't notice until the 1980s, and, that had never had any kind of communication with man. So there's some big woods up there. And if something wanted to stay hidden, if I wanted to stay hidden up there, you'd never find me. So imagine something that's, lives in that, in that type of environment. So yeah, I didn't take him real seriously, but I did see his rig multiple times over the years, and all in very, very rural places that normally you wouldn't see anyone unless you were hunting and been very serious about hunting.
That is so cool. And that
most of the hunters don't get very far away.
Absolutely. Was that late 90s as well that you stumbled upon him?
Yeah, actually it was about a year before the flood, so it would have been about 1995.
Okay, it checks out. Yep. Wow. Oh, it's so cool. So I mean, it's not seeing Bigfoot, but it's something for me just as cool, which would be stumbling upon Henry Franzoni when he's trying to do Bigfoot research out in the woods. That's so cool.
Yeah, I didn't think it was cool until just recently when I figured out who he was.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking at your email. So you also have a second confirmed sighting, which is up on Hillockburn Road, correct?
Yeah, way up Hillockburn, up where Hillockburn goes up. Basically, Hillockburn turns into Forest Service Road 45, kind of like the Estacada 224-46 thing. As soon as you enter National Forest, it becomes a Forest Service road, and then it's 46. And in Hillockburn's case, it becomes Highway 45 and makes a big loop around the mountain and comes back out at Memaloose. There's a bridge off of 46 that they call the Memaloose Bridge, and that's where basically the road comes and goes. Now the Memaloose Bridge has been closed now for a lot of years, but back at the time I think it was still open. But you get way up, and oddly enough, the place that I saw the second one was, if you go all the way up 45, and then you basically you make your first turn heading up South Fork Canyon, and it takes you up to a place called Helen's Lake. And there's a couple different ways. If you continue on the road past Helen's Lake, it'll take you up to the road I saw them, or the way I typically go is I take another right and go up and kind of come out at the top or the brim of Dead Horse Canyon, and then there's a road that drives around Dead Horse Canyon and taps back into the road that goes past Helen's Lake. It may be 45, 40. It's there hasn't been road signs up there for years and years and years and years, and I don't know exactly. It could be 45, it could be 45. But there's only one road that pretty much goes from where Dead Horse and kind of Memaloose Lake. There's Memaloose Lake has an access trail on top also. So from that access trail on top and from Dead Horse, they kind of meet together, and then they head south in between the head of Dead Horse Canyon and then over the top of Lucan's Creek on your right side. And on your left side is basically you're at the very highest point above at the west side of Wash Creek. And Wash Creek and Fish Creek, if you go up the Fish Creek drainage, like you're going up to Skookum Lake or Surprise Lake, the Wash Creek is part of that huge basin. So there's kind of a finger that splits the two drainages, but they meet together for the bottom, 5 or 7 miles of the Fish Creek drainage. So Wash Creek, going up Wash Creek and going up Fish Creek are just very similar things. And really, as terrain wise, you're just, like Wash Creek is only, a couple few miles from Skookum Lake. And Wash Creek burned out. That there was a big fire up there, and then the flood of '96 washed one of the bridges out completely, so that shut that whole road down. And this was in around 2010, 2011, and it was virtually the same day. This was Saturday morning, third Saturday October, opening day of elk season, and I was hunting pretty much in the head of South Fork Canyon, and I wasn't getting even close to anything, and so I thought I'd take a run way up Wash Creek and maybe drop into Lucan's Creek. And I got up there in the snow. We had a lot of snow the night before and a lot of snow that morning, and the snow was kind of dying off. The sky was clearing up a little bit, but I'm driving along and I'm several miles up there, and the snow is about maybe 10 inches deep or so, maybe 12. And I hadn't seen another rig all day, so there was nobody else up there, nowhere, no one even close. And then when I got into about 4 or 5 or 6 inches of snow, all of a sudden the tracks vanished. No more deer tracks, no more elk tracks, no nothing. And I'm cruising along, and it's getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I hate to have to, walk to a place I can call a buddy to help me get out of this if I do get stuck. And, I had a big truck that was in good shape with the right kind of tires. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to, I haven't seen a track in, probably, 2 miles, and the snow's getting deep. So there's a wide spot up here. I had my girlfriend with me at the time. I know this wide spot ahead. So what I'm going to do is, in that kind of snow, especially when you're breaking the path, you don't just, stop and back up and turn and back up and turn. You want to probably try to pull a cookie if you can, to get you most of the way turned around, so you don't get stuck trying to turn around. So I'm heading for this flat spot, and I hit that little flat spot and I pull a cookie and get turned around and start, get back in my own ruts and start heading back down the mountain. And I come around the very first curve, and I can see something standing on the right side of the road. And I'm like, am I confused? What is that? Because the timber's in the background, because it's not standing out in the road where I can see where I have a silhouette. It's standing on the right side of the road where I've got timber behind it. So it's really blending in well. And though I was only, I got within 100 yards before I watched it jump off the side of the road. And right that particular spot, there's a rock slide there. And the rock, well, it was either a rock slide or they could have brought a ton of rock in when they were building the road originally. So it could be a base that was built. It may or may not be man-made. There's a lot of rock right there. So it may or may not be a man-made rock slide. But whatever this was jumps off, and I haul butt, to close up that 100 yards real quick, because as far as I'm concerned, it's probably an elk. And it's big and dark and the wrong shape, but what else could it be? And I jump out of the truck, and look down immediately, and I'm looking at footprints. And my Danner elk hunter boots are size 12, and these footprints were perfect footprints, and they had come up out of the rock slide. So it was about, I would say, 40 yards from the road to the thick timber, and just this rock slide in between the two. And when I got out, I see this footprint, and it must have been waiting for me to get down the road. Must have heard me coming, waited for me to get down the road so it could cross or whatever. And I get out of the truck, and the first thing I'm going to do is look at the tracks to see, whether it was a bull or a cow or whatever it was. And it was, it, there's a human-like foot, and it's, a bare foot, and it's at least 3 inches, maybe 3.5 inches longer than the sole of my Danner boot. And so I run over to the edge immediately. And then I realize I don't have a gun. So I yell at my girlfriend to hand me my gun. And not because I was looking to shoot it, but because I was looking to make sure I was protected. And I'm looking, and I can't hear or see anything down there. It goes straight into dark timber. But what I could see is that 40 yards was covered by 2 jumps, and it was certainly very steep. So, a human probably could have done it in, maybe 5 to 10 jumps, and you would have been at the timber. Depending on how athletic you were, maybe you could do it in 5. But there was 2 spots where it jumped and hit a third of the way, and it jumped and hit just before the trees, and then it walked off. And the tracks coming up to the road were absolutely perfect. They walked up out of there. They crossed my first rut. They walked in and stepped into my second rut, and walked down my rut for about, under 20 feet, 15, 20 feet. It walked up my rut, and then must have heard me coming and walked over to the edge. So it was, the prints were perfect. They weren't scrambling footprints by any means. It was just walking very casually. Had to have some weight to it because the prints were even good in my tire tracks. So, my truck weighs 8,000 pounds, and naturally it spread over 4 tires, and the tires are soft and not rigid. And so, it's possible. You'll see elk tracks in tire tracks where they leave a deeper impression. So it's not, it doesn't have to be crazy heavy, but it had to be pretty heavy to leave those perfect prints even in my rut. And I kind of investigated for a few minutes, was a little bit, surprised. And, I guess the thing that surprised me the most is that and now I'd seen one before, 10 years earlier. So this wasn't a surprise to me that they exist, but it was very shocking to me for it to be that far up, because the animals seemed to be much lower. I hadn't seen an animal track in 2 miles. So maybe it was moving down at that point. I don't know, but it was in some pretty deep snow, 10, 12 inches of snow is pretty deep snow to try to gather. And then I told my girlfriend, I said, well, do you believe in Bigfoot? And she said, I don't know. And I go, you want to see if it's real or not? And she says, I don't know. I said, come here. You come out of the truck. I want to show you something. And she walked over and looked at those tracks and jumped back in my truck and started screaming for me to get her off of that mountain.
Oh my goodness.
She was so scared just by seeing the prints, and I couldn't calm her down. It was crazy. I ended up having to drive. I got to hunt the rest of the day, but I had to drive 15 miles from there to hunt before she was like, okay, I feel okay enough if you want to stay up here. It was pretty crazy.
Oh, that's incredible. This was around, was it 2010 or 2011, around there?
Yeah, 2010 or 11. I'm not sure which, but okay. One of the two.
You had said something. I just want to see if you can give a little bit more detail about it. When you say bare footprint, can you maybe describe what you mean by that?
I meant like human footprints, right, with no clothes on.
Yep.
Yeah, naked footprints. Yeah, they don't look anything like a bear. Let me tell you that. And they don't look anything like a bear even when a bear tracks over itself. A lot of times you'll see a bear, step almost to his front paw. And so you take a rear foot and a front foot and combine the two together, and a lot of people will say that's a Sasquatch track or whatever, and there's nothing further from it. Bears can't retract their claws, so they're always going to have those claws sticking out. And even a black bear's claws are an inch and a half plus long. So there's really just no confusing that. And the pads, the bears have pads and different pads on their rear feet versus their front feet, and it's for a trained eye, there's no mistaking when a bear has stepped on its own track. It's that cannot be confused. However, I've heard a lot of people, and even seen pictures where somebody said they got a picture of a Sasquatch track, and I glance at it and I'm like, yeah, no.
Right. Yeah, I gotcha. This area, the Hillockburn Road area, I mean, it comes up a lot. There's been a ton of activity up there. A lot of it is not public, but it's been told to me. And there's some where if you start searching for Hillockburn Road, Bigfoot activity, you're going to find it on older websites, and it's out there. It's definitely out there. So that's some very, very interesting area that you were up there. Now, this is up near Goat Mountain, right?
Yeah. So you literally, when you get up, oh goodness, you're probably 4 miles above where you enter into national forest is the road that splits off that goes up to Goat Mountain, and it goes in dead ends. The road goes up. It's tricky to get up to Goat Mountain. You got to really know how to do it these days. But the roads are virtually cut off right where you hit private land. So the towers, the Goat Mountain towers, and the Williams Lake towers, which I call them all the Goat Mountain towers, but they're two separate humps a few hundred yards away from each other. Those are both actually public land, but they're accessed from Weyerhaeuser, which is private timberland.
Okay, yeah, I'm looking at it on Onyx right now, and it's so weird because you're right. You've got it's got Weyerhaeuser and then Mount Hood National Forest, and just I don't even know how you would get up there, man. It would be awesome if someone from Weyerhaeuser was listening and they had Bigfoot stories. I can always just dream about that, but you never know, right? But
yeah, I don't know. I don't know what those guys say about it. I hunt a lot of Weyerhaeuser property. I go both in and out of, public and Weyerhaeuser. I try to put in for it every year. I have Molalla Weyerhaeuser this year, and the last 10 years or so, I've been hunting Estacada Weyerhaeuser, and prior to that, I hunted Molalla Weyerhaeuser. But it's really interesting. As you're going up when you turn into national forest coming up Highway 45 or Hillockburn, the left side of the road is all national forest, and pretty much the right side of the road is all either BLM or private. There's a little bit where national forest kind of crosses the road, but the higher you get, the less national forest there is. So once you get up a certain point, like up around, say, for example, Williams Lake's really only, it's not very far from the main road. And there's an actual crossover road that's on BLM land that has a trail coming from public to get to Williams Lake. That's, it can't be more than a half mile long. It's really a short trail to get to Williams Lake. And you can drive to Williams Lake at the other end. So Williams Lake, part of it's on Weyerhaeuser and part of it is on public. And then the public is up in that higher country is all BLM land, and which is I don't know why it is, but BLM land just holds a ton more animals than the regular national forest does. Pretty much anywhere you go, the BLM land is just rich with deer and elk and bears and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's a complicated road system. It takes you a long time to learn it from either side. It's, I remember years ago, the county sheriff this has been a long time ago, 25, 30 years ago. The county sheriff had supposedly found a body up past Goat Mountain. Somebody had you had found one in the rocks or bones or something that they thought was a body, and it wasn't a body. But they there was a whole bunch of deputies were up there, 6 or 7 of them, and they were up there half the night. They ended up coming out in the middle of, in the mid hours of the morning, because they were lost up there, and they were just on the public side, and there was 2 ways out then. So it can be pretty complicated.
Oh my goodness, that's intense. So Goat Mountain is another area that really comes up if you search into this area for Bigfoot stuff. It comes up a lot. The Oregon Bigfoot Highway book, you can find a lot of stuff in there. Have you had things happen around Goat Mountain as well?
Never at Goat Mountain.
Okay.
I've heard some crazy stuff. I'll tell you one of the craziest things that I've never been able to explain to this day.
All right.
And this was prior to me seeing, that living creature the first time. A lot of people, anytime they're on Highway 45, they go up Hillockburn. Once they get up into National Forest, a lot of people from that point, in fact, even Hillockburn Road, anybody that goes up there, they say they're going up Goat. So from there all the way up to Dead Horse Canyon, which is kind of the highest point of that road system, people refer to that all as Goat Mountain. So when people tell you they had a sighting at Goat Mountain, it probably wasn't on Goat Mountain. In fact, Goat Mountain it has so many, that's where high school kids go up and drink beer, and it's, kind of a party place. And it's really not, you're probably not going to have any sightings right on Goat Mountain itself. It just, but you get you get within a quarter mile any direction of it, and it's very, very possible. And then I would bet most of the references are, higher up above, where you would pass Goat Mountain on the main highway or the main road. I say highway, but it's literally, only the first quarter of it is paved, and even then it's barely double wide, and then it instantly goes to single gravel, and it's very rough, and but it is it's considered a main through road through the Forest Service. If it's got a 2-digit number, it's a main road. So it's, yeah, you'll find that most of your sightings, if people pinpointed it or they knew the road they were on, it's going to be a 4-digit or a 7-digit number.
Okay.
Which is, yeah. So the 4 digits means that it connects. It has 2 ends. It'll come out somewhere, and then the 7-digit number. So basically, you have the 4-digit number, which is going to start out with, say, 45, because it's Highway 45. So say you have Highway 4540. Okay, it's going to go through. It's going to come out at another end. Maybe it comes out to the same road. Maybe it comes out to a different road, but it goes through. And then say a spur road off of that just goes in dead ends. That's going to be 4540, 120, or 130, or 150, or 170. And they continue to climb. The 3-digit number gets higher as you go further up the road. So I was in South Fork Canyon. I was above South Fork Canyon, taking niece and 2 nephews with a sister-in-law up to a place they wanted to camp, someplace rural, way out of the way, someplace it was going to be more like being in nature. So I thought, okay, well, I can take them up Goat. Again, I'm referring to it as Goat when it's not. I can take them up Goat and give them a nice place. It's easy for them to find their way home, and they're not that far away from things, and they might even have cell service because they're so close to the towers. And I take them up and help them get a camp set up on a little tiny dead end log landing road. Not an actual road, just a little skidder where they had the log landing and the yarder at one time when they logged it. And we're the west side of South Fork, the South Fork of the Clackamas River, which is South Fork Canyon, is where it comes out of a spring. And we are what went on elevation wise was a few hundred feet lower than Helen's Lake, not to the 45 road, kind of between the 45 road and the next road that would be to the south or uphill from it. I heard a fight of some sort that, I can't confirm what it was. The only thing that I could ever tell you back at the time is it had to be some kind of a bear that I've never heard him make those kind of noises before in a all-out fight with a mountain lion. It was the scariest, loudest, most obnoxious. You could picture the hair flying just by listening to the noise. It was unbelievable. And it went on for probably a good 10 minutes straight before either somebody surrendered or one of them got killed. But after kind of experiencing what I have now, it makes me feel like that could have been a Sasquatch, not a bear, because I've heard bears and I've heard all their noises, and they make some incredible noises. They can even sound like human. But this was just different. It was just deeper and more throaty, and it was just vicious. Not like anything I've ever heard from a bear, and you could clearly tell the mountain lion was the opponent because they make such crazy high pitched noises and such a different range of vocals and every once in a while throwing in one of their nasty growls or rowls or whatever you would call it. It was pretty clear that there was a mountain lion fighting something, and whatever it was a worthy opponent, because it was unbelievable. So that's kind of the only thing, other than hearing weird sounds in the night, that I've actually seen up goat. Now at Williams Lake a week ago, Sunday, spending the night at Williams Lake, I heard some pretty incredible stuff. There at 2:30 in the morning, I heard something woke me up, and something within 50 yards of my tent and mine and my nephew's pickup trucks, just up on the hill in the timber. I mean, it was very close. I definitely could have thrown a rock to where the sound was coming from, but something was mumbling very, very loud, very, very deep. And I think I told you about this before. It was mumbling kind of like you hear those Sierra sounds, but it didn't have any of that weird high pitch, massive elevations in high versus low. This was all just really low, but somewhat aggressive, and definitely it sounded like it was trying to talk, except for I couldn't tell you a thing it said. It didn't, none of it was totally foreign to me. But the crazy thing was, this thing goes off, and then across the lake, which would be just a couple of acres away, it's probably not 150 yards across the lake at that particular point. All of a sudden, there's something talking exactly like that back at whatever was on that hillside. And they went back and forth, which seemed like a half an hour, but it was probably 5 minutes, maybe 10 at the max. But they had a conversation back and forth, almost like I've heard a lot of times, being way up in the mountains, especially like up around like Olalley Lake and the Olalley Wilderness area, you hear a lot of owls around those lakes, where owls can make some incredible noises too. They don't just make the average little hoot, and they make loud noises. And you hear them up in those. A lot of times I've heard them up around Olalley. I've heard a lot of owls, but up there, it seems like they'll talk back and forth all night long. And you might even get two or three of them from, even a half mile away from each other. And they're so loud, you can just hear they carry back and forth. It was a lot like you hear them conversing, except for it was way more mumbly. It wasn't as sharp and crisp as the detail of the noise that the owls make. Even when the owls do their weird, hoot, 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 where they don't sound anything like a hoot, but they have multiple levels of their vocalization. This was just not consistent like that. It was pretty creepy. I'll tell you what, it kept me up the rest of the night. I did not like having something I didn't know that close to me. And it's very dark down at that lake at night. You're down in a hole, and it's, thick brush and timber 360 degrees around that lake, other than the very narrow little trail road that is so narrow you couldn't turn around on it if you tried. You have to back out to a spot to turn around, or there's one little tiny place right at the lake you can turn around. But if you're down there, we have our vehicles down there, and we turn around way up the road and back in there. And then otherwise, once one rig's down there, you don't have room to turn around. And then you put a tent up, back in the trees. Anybody that comes in has to back out. So it's very dark and a lot of noises around the lake. It's really weird because the evening started out that we were hearing a bunch of elk bugle, and well, not a bunch. There were two bulls that were bugling, but it seemed a little crazy because every time the elk would bugle, this happens sometimes. The coyotes go crazy, and there was probably a half a dozen coyotes up there, and they make all their yipping and screaming and everything from mildly high pitched to extremely high pitched weird. They even can sound like monkeys. But that night or that next morning, there was something on the other side of that lake that sounded exactly like chimpanzees screaming at each other, like they're going to go on the warpath.
Oh, wow.
Which really topped off the fact that I hadn't slept since those things woke me up. And I only went to bed like an hour before that. So, because I like to listen to the noise, and the elk were bugling, so I was just listening. And yeah, that was a pretty interesting experience. So that's pretty close to Goat Mountain. That's I would say it's easily within 2 miles of the towers, not by road, but by a crow's fly, easily within 2 miles, maybe a mile and a half to the towers.
And that was, you said it was around like September 7th, 2025. So very recent.
It was, yeah, September. It was Sunday, a week ago Sunday.
Okay. That's wild.
It was Labor Day weekend. So yeah, that's right. Yep. Labor Day weekend. As much time as I've spent up there, up around Goat Mountain and all the places beyond, you would think that, I'd run into something by accident, but remember, I'm also not looking for it. So when I find it, it's entirely by accident. I'm not comfortable around them. I'm not. If you wanted me to go on an expedition, I'd be heavily armed. I just, I don't want anything to do with those things. They just happen to be in the areas that I spend a lot of time, and I've just stumbled into them. And if I never saw one again, I would be very pleased.
There was a interesting account that you had shared with me in our first chat, and I believe it was around, I want to say it was like around 46. The bear. Is that something you'd be able to share on this call?
Sure. Yeah, that was this spring. That was in May. I could probably tell you the exact date. It was May 10th, just because I have a punch tag for that date. But I'd been watching this bear for a couple of weeks, and he'd show up, and then he'd disappear, but he for some reason liked this hillside, and it's pretty heavy timber bordered on heavy reprod that goes down into a canyon that's been pretty well protected from logging down near the creek for a long time. So we were down there messing around, and there's an old road that comes in from the opposite end that I was on May 10th. So I kind of experienced this the first time, walking in from the other side on a dirt road that got pushed in, and they were logging, and then the Forest Service was logging, but they were cutting through Weyerhaeuser to get the logs and to get in there and do their stuff. It was literally logging right on the border of Weyerhaeuser and National Forest. And I couldn't figure out for the life of me why they punched this road in and they took all these logs out of there, but they left there must have been like 6 or 7 log truck loads all stacked up on the side of the road, and they just abandoned them. They were good full length logs, not like they were scrap ones. And they literally threw a bunch of trees and pushed some boulders and to block the road from going in long before they got all the lumber out of there. So out of curiosity, me and my nephew decided we were going to go down to the end, and we walked down there, and we're just looking around. We have our binoculars with us constantly. If you don't have them, you're not hunting. And I'm looking through the trees up the end of this thing, and I'm looking through the treetops trying to see the mountain on the other side to see if there's any open meadows or any place I can see through the trees to see what you can't see from anywhere else. And this technique is very, very good for hunting. You should be, you gotta look everywhere because you just might be surprised at what you see that nobody can see from anywhere else. So I was looking through, and all of a sudden I caught like this huge clump of branches, and not real. We won't call them branches. We'll call them fir boughs because that's what they were. They were branches that still had all the fir boughs on them. And I'm looking at this thing and looking at it, and it's like 100 feet up in a tree, and I can see the tree pretty well at different places. So it's an old growth tree. It's 6-8 feet in diameter, Douglas fir, and it's like 100 feet up in there. And I'm looking at this, and I'm like, I can see the detail of the bottom of this nest, that this is weaved like in and out, and it's not alder branches. I mean, there's a lot of alders around, being at near the base of this tree is very close to the creek bottom, within 50 yards of the creek bottom. It was a very strange, weird thing that caught my eye, that was different. It was wrong. Nothing was right about it. And so I met up with my nephew a short time later and said, "You got to come look at this." And so he pulls up his binoculars and he says, "Holy smokes, that's like weaved." And he goes, "Is that a nest?" And I go, "Well, if it's a nest, it's like at least 8 or 10 feet wide, maybe wider. It's hard to tell from this distance what the real width is." I go, "But that's, it looks like a giant nest to me." And he goes, "Well, let's go down there and look up." So we went down to the base, and if you get down there, it's like 100 feet up, and the canopy is so thick you can't see that nest at all at the base of the tree looking up. But I investigated the tree thoroughly to see if there was any spike marks from a logger climbing up there, if there was any claw marks from bears or lions going up there, cougars. And there's really no tear marks or no distinctive scratch or marks on it. So in my impression, something had to physically grab it and go up it like a bear, except for without claws. Because the bears just run up it like a cat. They use their strength, not necessarily their claws, but their claws get in the way, so they leave all kinds of scar damage when they go up a tree, especially one that size. And there's just no damage to the base of the tree. So we went back up until we could see it again, which was almost to the exact spot I spotted it to begin with. We couldn't seem to get any closer to look at it, but we have very high quality binoculars, and we could clearly see that this was all weaved out and this and that. And we're sitting there talking about it, going, "Is this like some kind of a Sasquatch nest?" And I said to my nephew, I'm like, "There's no bird I know of that can lift those branches and fly into that canopy and then come up with fingers to be able to tie those, to weave those things in and out." And he's like, "I'm totally with you." He's like, there's no way that this is there, but it is." And so we kind of, left it alone. And, in the back of our minds, we were thinking, well, maybe the Forest Service ran into this and maybe they just shut off their logging because of it, so it wouldn't stir up any attention or there's a lot of rumors around there. I know that a friend of mine reported a Bigfoot sighting to the Estacada Ranger District, which is no longer there now. They operate out of a building in Sandy now. But up until a few years back, they had a office right as you come into Estacada, and he reported it. And the gal at the desk said that he said, "Well, have you had other people say anything?" And she said, "Yeah, we've had quite a few reports, but we don't talk about that."
Really?
Goes,
I've never heard of that. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. She flat out said that to my buddy. He goes, "You don't talk about it." She goes, "Yeah, that's just something we don't talk about." So it makes you wonder, how much they know if the gal at the desk, hears a lot of this, what have those Forest Service guys stumbled into over the years? Hard to say. But anyway, it appeared that they kind of abandoned their operation. They didn't leave a mess. It's like they picked up all their equipment and went home before they finished taking their logs out that were already cut, stripped, stacked, ready to load right onto the log trucks. And they just left them sitting. So it really made no sense. And I think that's where my curiosity came from originally, to walk down there to find out why did they stop? They're not leaving a pile of logs for habitat for bunny rabbits. That's, they do plenty of those kind of things, but bunny rabbits like brush piles, not stacks of perfect logs with no branches. So back after this, we kind of, let it go, and we talk about it a little bit amongst each other. And about a week later, we're back in there, but we're in from another direction. And just because, we'd seen some elk cross the road, so we decided we'd go down and investigate. And we were kind of following that creek bottom down, which is creek, and we found another one of those nests, except for this one was all dried up. The needles that were still up there were completely brown. 90% of the needles had fallen off. Half of the branches had just kind of crumbled, I guess, once the fir boughs dry up. Maybe that's what was kind of holding some of the joints or whatever. But, down on the ground, between the tree and the creek, the downhill side of the creek, there was all kinds of branches that were broken off, that had fallen out of that other nest. So I don't know what, why, how. I was talking to another friend that said, well, there's no reason they go up and live in a nest 100 feet up in a tree. I said, well, what about if they had young, and what if they had young? What if mom needs to hunt and there's an infant version or a small one that's, in danger to be around all the bears that are in here and all the mountain lions that are in here, and even people, which there's not many people once you get off a road anywhere in the Mount Hood area. But but the only thing we could figure is maybe they shove their youth in those things while they're out hunting. And it doesn't seem like, it just doesn't seem normal for, I don't know, but it's hard to say. There's a lot of unanswered questions to that. But anyway, I ended up hunting in there and from the other side, and I'd spotted this bear over and over, and he was a giant. He was an absolute giant. And I'm watching him one day, and this might be my final opportunity, or this might be my opportunity. It looks like he might, end up stepping someplace that he gives me a chance to take a shot at him. And out of the blue, after watching him for hours, and he'd just disappear, and then he'd come strolling back by the areas where I could pick him out, and he's just feeding and wandering and eating berries and all kinds of different stuff. But he all of a sudden is like sitting down with his nose straight up in the air. So I'm thinking to myself, well, he must smell me, but I'm not close enough to him to really be a threat. And the wind's coming my way, so there must have been a swirl in the wind. And he's kind of looking, he's facing downhill, and I'm kind of half side hill downhill away from him. And all of a sudden, he stands all the way up on his hind legs, and he takes off running away from the area that I lose him every time I see him. He disappears into this thick stuff, and he goes downhill. I can hear him, when he's walking. I see where he's going, and he never, ever goes out where he's exposed, which he takes off running like something's going to eat him out through the open timber. And I can't get him to walk in that open timber so I can get a shot at him, let alone have him take off running across it. And then coming out of that timber, he has to run through a clear cut beyond the timber and puts himself in sight of everyone. Anybody driving down the road would be able to see him. And he vanishes. And then I all of a sudden hear some noise down below. And basically, if you follow the tree line that I'd been watching him, the big timber that he ran away from, all of a sudden I see a bear go running up a tree. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that was crazy. And I'm looking at him, and this bear's not near as big. He's more like a better than average size bear. And he's up that tree and he's panicking. He's running around this tree. And this is an old growth tree also. And so it's really massive in diameter. And he's running around the tree and he goes up to the first big branch, which is, quite a ways up, 30, 40 feet. And he gets out on this limb and he's looking and he jumps on the back of the tree and he's peeking around both sides of this tree, looking downhill, same direction that big bear was looking. And it seems like he gets comfortable and he starts heading down the tree. Well, he gets down the tree, and at the very base of the tree, I can't see where the tree meets the dirt. I'm missing the last couple feet because of branches and brush and stuff kind of blocking my view. And this thing starts, basically it comes out of the tree and it starts sneaking down the hill, and it's staying a little closer to the timber. If it gets close to the reprod, I can't see it at all. But if it gets near the timber, then I can see it. It'll show up here and there on its way down to the creek. And it's staying up near the timber. Well, all of a sudden I see it whip around and I can hear it take off back up the hill. And the next thing I know, I see him going up that tree again. He's going up the tree next to it, I think. And he starts taking off up this other old growth tree. And I'm looking down with my binoculars trying to figure out what the heck is going on down there. And all of a sudden, in one of those low spots, that if you're near the timber, I could see you. If you're near the reprod, I can't. I can see this black hair, dark thing that's not in the timber. It's near the reprod, but I can see this black thing go across this low spot that's only a few yards wide. So I kind of only see it for a split second and then it disappears. So my immediate thought is there must be giant black bear, because the chocolate bear I was watching was just unbelievable. I mean, he was probably close to 500 pounds and just a giant, just a pig with big fat rolls and just huge. Head just looked, like a basketball. And so this other bear would have to just be huge or just wicked mean and huge. So I'm watching this bear, and the bear that's in the tree, seems to calm down a little bit. And then it kind of comes down to the bottom. And I decide, well, I only have a week left of my hunt or whatever. And so I'm going to go ahead and shoot that bear. And he's about, I don't know, 10 feet up in the tree, and I shoot him and he falls, and I'm pretty sure that, I kill him. And then all of a sudden I hear this horrible screaming, just nasty, loud screaming, just stood the hair up on my back. And it's going down to the creek, and it keeps screaming all the way to the creek. And then I can hear it splashing down the creek, screaming at these unbelievable levels. I mean, it was loud, and it kept screaming as it ran. It probably got at least a half a mile down the creek before the timber and the brush and everything completely dampened the noise out. And whether it stopped screaming at that point or whether it just completely faded out, I'm not sure. But I've never heard a bear make the noises that this thing was screaming. And so it kind of left me, to believe that there might have been something hunting those bears while I was hunting those bears, but I don't know that. It's like I say, it could have been just a vicious bear. It could have been maybe they have a scream that I've never heard before, but you certainly don't hear them screaming and running, at top speed. They wouldn't be running at top speed and bellowing, at the top of their lungs for, I mean, it seemed like it lasted a minute. It probably didn't. It probably lasted, 20 seconds, but it was pretty creepy. We thought at first, my nephew met up with me before we go to get this bear, and I said, I don't know what the heck's going on. He goes, well, maybe you didn't hit it right, and maybe you wounded it, and maybe it was making some blood curdling roar that you've just never heard before because it was wounded and trying to get away. And I said, you know what? we'll call it that. So let's go over there and see what's going on. And we hiked to that tree. We drove to another road because it was a lot closer to get down to that tree. And we hiked down in there, and my bear was laying on its back dead right where it fell out of the tree.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Oof, what a wild story. I mean, it's as crazy as the first time I heard it. Just, it's awesome. That area is so intensely wild. And, any of these places that have been coming up today, I mean, you got to be careful when you get out there. I mean, as it says in the book, Oregon Bigfoot Highway, you got to make sure you got a full tank of gas, safety supplies and extra tires. You could easily, mess up a tire up there. You don't mess around when you're going out in these areas outside of Estacada and Detroit for sure. Jim, it has been awesome talking to you. I do have one last question, kind of a one-off, and if it doesn't hit, no problem. But have you ever heard of anything weird happening over by let me look at my map here. It's the Warm Springs Reservation.
Yeah. There's a lot of people, claim that they've seen stuff. Where I told you my original story that was above Last Creek there, right south of Peavine. That's only a couple miles from Warm Springs Meadow, which is kind of almost borders the Warm Springs Indian Reservation. Yeah, there's a lot of country that really, Pinhead Butte, Olali Butte, the Pinheads that, I ran into, I'm sorry, I can't keep his name, but the guy from Skookum Lake, I saw him up at Pinhead once.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's, that's one of the other places that I'd stumbled into him. So I'm going to say there's probably an awful lot of activity there. I know that if you're going out there looking for these things, you need to make sure you're in a place where there's lots of elk and lots of bears, because they either, that's a food source, or that is, well, I know of one place of the Kallawash River where there's been a ton of activity, and I've had some really weird things, never personally seen, but I've had some incredible stuff that could be a whole nother story going on up there. And that is just filled with deer. There's hardly any elk in that particular pocket. So it's not always elk. They've got to have a good source. So it seems like everywhere I hear of a sighting, or I've heard somebody say, oh, I saw one of these, or so on and so forth, it always seems to be where there's a lot of elk. And there is a ton of elk on the reservation and back towards, I actually saw a footprint in Badger Creek Wilderness area one time, which is kind of the other end, off reservation, kind of the other end, the mount, very close, just basically directly east of Mount Hood. So, but I've never heard of anybody seeing anything over there. Every time I've heard of somebody saying, oh, I saw one, or I heard one, or this or that, it's always been kind of where Skyline Road gets to kind of the headwaters of Cabin Creek, and then through the timber back towards Pinhead, and then east of there. There was an Indian guy I used to run into all the time up on 42. His name was Rodney, and he lived on the reservation, and he had claimed he'd seen them multiple times, and they were always right in that area also.
It's incredible. I mean, how cool is it? You're out there as an outdoorsman, as a hunter, but you keep having these interactions and weird things happening. And I'm just, thank you so much for reaching out to the show and for sharing what you've experienced over the years, Jim. It has been a delightful conversation. It's always fun to talk to someone who really knows the area around the Oregon Bigfoot Highway. I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show. I just want to make sure that you were able to share everything that you wanted to talk about today.
Yeah, I think we covered plenty. Maybe we'll have another conversation down the road, and I can tell you about all the things I can't confirm.
Absolutely. Yeah. Feel free to reach out, and we can definitely set that up for a later time. I'd love to have you back on, but thanks again, sir.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Bigfoot Society podcast. Every encounter we share reminds us that the world is bigger and stranger than we think, and that the truth is often hiding just beyond the tree line. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the channel on YouTube Hit the bell so you don't miss the next episode, and share this with a friend who's into mysteries, monsters, or the unexplained. And if you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcast, please follow the show there and leave us a 5-star positive review, because all of that helps more people discover the show. And remember, if you or someone you know has had a Bigfoot sighting, please, I'd love to hear from you. So email me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com and let's start the conversation. If you haven't gotten a chance yet, check out our membership community over at www.bigfootsocietypodcast.com. And that's where you can hear tomorrow's episode today, early and ad-free, and members-only episodes every week. Also, it's a place to connect with other people that are into the Bigfoot subject as much as you are. Thanks again for following along with the Bigfoot Society. Until next time, keep your eyes open, trust your gut, and never stop asking what else might be out there. And see you in the woods.